A woman was discovered lifeless inside her luxurious home, and at first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Everyone assumed it was a tragic accident, something that could happen to anyone. But as the hours passed, small details began to raise eyebrows. Soon, detectives started digging deeper. What they uncovered turned the quiet case into a national conversation, one filled with shocking revelations, lingering doubts, and mysteries that refused to fade. Leslie London was born on April 26, 1951, in New York, and from the very beginning, people around her knew she carried a certain presence. She grew up in a close-knit Jewish family, well-educated, well-spoken, and highly motivated. Those who knew her described her as someone who took life seriously. She was ambitious but grounded, confident without being loud, and always aware of what she wanted. Her early years were stable, structured, and filled with the kind of expectations that come with growing up in a disciplined home. When she went off to college, she didn't wander or experiment in the way some people do. She studied hard, followed routines, and moved toward adulthood with purpose. And somewhere along that journey, she met a man who would become central to her life for the next several decades, Robert Neulander. He was a young medical student at the time, focused, dedicated, and already showing signs of the strong personality that would later become a key part of this story. Their connection developed quickly. Robert was charismatic, smart, and driven. Leslie was equally determined in her own way. Their personalities didn't clash, instead, they seemed to fit into place. They married, built a life, and over time, raised a family. But while the relationship appeared stable from the outside, people close to them would later mention subtle shifts, small tensions, unspoken disagreements, and differences in the way they approached life. Nothing dramatic. Nothing explosive. Just the sort of internal strain that slowly builds in the background. Meanwhile, Robert's career grew. He became a respected OB/GYN in Syracuse, known for his confidence and skill. His reputation was strong, and his financial success eventually allowed the family to move into a large home, the kind that symbolized that they had made it. Leslie, on the other hand, became more involved in community work and volunteer projects. She was active, social, and always moving in different circles. Their daily lives became busy and separate in ways neither of them fully addressed. As the years passed, cracks began to show. Friends later recalled that the marriage had become strained. Some said they were functioning more like business partners than a couple. Others mentioned that there were rumors of marital counseling and private issues the two were trying to work through. None of this was unusual in long marriages, but it painted a picture of a relationship that wasn't as perfect as it might have appeared. By 2012, the couple decided to separate. Leslie moved into a new home on Brocker Road, while Robert stayed in the original residence. Despite the separation, the two remained connected, speaking regularly, managing family matters, and navigating the transition as calmly as possible. To most people around them, the situation seemed civil. Not warm, but not aggressive either. It was the kind of separation that didn't set off alarms. The day that changed everything came almost a year later. On September 17, 2012, at around 8 a.m., a 911 call was placed from Leslie's home. The caller was Robert. He was frantic, breathless, and shouting that his wife had fallen in the bathroom. He told the operator that she was severely injured and needed immediate help. According to him, he found her unconscious in the shower after what appeared to be a terrible accident. When paramedics arrived, they found Robert kneeling beside Leslie's body in the bedroom. He was shirtless, sweating heavily, and performing CPR. The first responders noted that he appeared emotionally distraught and physically drained. But they also noticed something else. The scene itself didn't look entirely consistent with the story of a simple fall. There was blood in multiple locations. The bedding had been removed. Towels were scattered. The shower area showed marks that drew attention. And the position of the body raised questions. At the time, though, paramedics focused only on the emergency at hand. They continued CPR, but it was too late. Leslie was pronounced dead shortly after. Initially, the case appeared straightforward, a tragic accident. Falls in the shower happen every year, and nothing outwardly proved otherwise. Police did a routine overview of the home, spoke with Robert, and allowed the case to close without further investigation. There was grief, confusion, and sadness, but no suspicion. At least not yet. What changed the direction of everything came from someone who wasn't a detective, wasn't part of law enforcement, and had no personal connection to the family. A woman named Jenna Rudd, who worked at the emergency medical service, raised concerns about what she had seen that morning. She told her supervisors that something about the scene didn't sit right with her, that the injuries didn't match what she would expect from an ordinary fall. She felt obligated to say something. Her observations made their way up the chain. Soon, another paramedic described similar doubts. And within weeks, those comments reached the local district attorney's office. That was enough to reopen the case. Investigators returned to the home, reviewed photos, analyzed blood patterns, and consulted forensic experts. What began as a quiet, closed case quickly turned into a full forensic review. They looked closely at the location of bloodstains, the distribution of droplets, and the pattern on the walls. Specialists noted that certain blood spatter indicated movement, specifically, movement of the body after injury. The investigation also turned toward Robert's timeline. Where he was that morning, what he said happened, and how his actions matched the physical evidence. Detectives began to wonder whether he had moved Leslie's body from the bathroom to the bedroom, and if so, why. Their focus wasn't on emotion. It was strictly on facts, patterns, and contradictions. The longer they analyzed, the more doubts they formed. Some experts believed the injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. Others disagreed. There was no absolute consensus. But there was enough concern to push the case further, and soon, the district attorney made a major decision. They would present the evidence to a grand jury. In April 2014, nearly 2 years after Leslie's death, Robert Neulander was indicted on multiple charges, including second-degree murder and evidence tampering. The announcement sent shockwaves through Syracuse. A respected doctor, a once admired figure, was suddenly at the center of a case that seemed to grow more complicated by the day. The trial that followed would reveal evidence, photos, timelines, testimonies, and expert opinions, each of them pulling the story in different directions. And as the details emerged, the question that started small would become the center of a national debate. Was Leslie's death truly an accident, or was it something else entirely? The trial of Robert Neulander began in March 2015, and from the very first day, it became clear that this case would not be straightforward. Prosecutors presented the death of Leslie London not as a tragic accident, but as a carefully concealed homicide. They argued that Robert, a trained physician, had manipulated the scene to make the fall appear natural. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that every injury, every bloodstain, and every action Robert took was consistent with panic, shock, and a desperate attempt to save his wife. The courtroom atmosphere was tense. The community was divided. Some believed Robert had been wrongly accused and that the state was building a case from speculation rather than fact. Others felt there was simply too much physical evidence pointing toward foul play. And standing at the center of it all were the photographs, the images taken immediately after first responders arrived, and the forensic reconstructions that experts later created, prosecutors began by focusing on the blood evidence. They emphasized that the pattern of bloodstains on the wall near Leslie's bathroom shower appeared to be cast-off spatter, not drip marks. According to their experts, these stains suggested repeated movement of an already bleeding individual, rather than a collapse in one location. They also pointed out that several bloodstains were found at heights that didn't align with the idea of Leslie falling downward. Next was the bedroom. Investigators testified that they found blood on the mattress, pillows, and bed frame. The prosecution argued that these patterns indicated Leslie had been moved from the bathroom into the bedroom, placed on the bed, and then repositioned before paramedics arrived. The state claimed that Robert staged the bedroom to appear as though he had attempted CPR there, when in reality, he was trying to adjust the scene before calling for help. A crucial part of their argument centered on the timeline. Prosecutors said Robert had delayed calling 911 after discovering Leslie, choosing instead to move her body, attempt cleanup, and create what they believed was a false narrative of events. They highlighted specific moments in the 911 call when Robert seemed unusually controlled or focused on details that raised suspicion. Every second of that call was analyzed in court. The defense countered each claim. They presented medical experts who insisted that the blood patterns in the bathroom were fully consistent with Leslie falling backward and striking her head on multiple surfaces. They also pointed out that Robert's attempts at CPR, combined with the natural flow of blood from injuries on Leslie's head, could easily explain the patterns found in the bedroom. According to the defense, nothing in the scene required staging to make sense. They also introduced evidence that Leslie had been suffering from health issues leading up to her death, including chronic dizziness and a condition that might have made her more vulnerable to falls. Friends and family testified that she had mentioned feeling faint on several occasions. Her medical history, they argued, supported the accident theory far more than anything else. One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was the Neulanders' housekeeper. She testified that on the morning of the incident, she arrived at the home to find Robert asking her to remove sheets and towels. The prosecution argued this was part of an attempt to clean up the scene. The defense claimed it was simply a panicked man trying to help first responders and clear space. Another major moment in the trial was the testimony of the paramedics. They described their observations in detail: Leslie's injuries, Robert's behavior, the condition of the bathroom, and the general atmosphere of the home. While some paramedics felt uneasy about the scene, others stated that nothing they observed explicitly contradicted the accident narrative. The prosecution used their uncertainty to suggest that something was wrong. The defense used the same uncertainty to argue that nothing was proven. The trial lasted weeks, with expert after expert taking the stand. Both sides relied heavily on forensic reconstruction, diagrams, photos, and digital models showing possible trajectories and positions. Each side argued that their version best matched the evidence. But even with all the visuals, there were still unknowns, moments that could not be reconstructed with absolute certainty. Then came what many considered one of the most emotionally difficult parts of the trial: testimony from the Neulander children. Their daughter, Jenna, had been inside the home the morning her mother died. She took the stand and described hearing a loud thud, then rushing toward the bathroom. She said she found her father attempting to revive her mother, and that everything she witnessed that morning aligned with an accident. She spoke firmly, but the moment was painful for everyone involved. Prosecutors questioned her memory, suggesting that trauma and stress may have caused her to misinterpret or overlook critical details. The defense objected strongly, arguing that Jenna's account was consistent, logical, and completely aligned with what she had said from the beginning. After weeks of testimony, arguments, and debate, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for days, reviewing photographs, transcripts, and diagrams. The weight of their decision was clear in the courtroom. Robert sat quietly, listening, waiting. Dozens of reporters stood outside the courthouse each day, updating the public on every development. Finally, in April 2015, the verdict was announced. Robert Neulander was found guilty on all charges, including second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence. The courtroom was silent as the words were read out. Some gasped. Others cried. Robert showed little reaction. His family, sitting behind him, struggled to process what had just happened. The judge sentenced him to 20 years to life in prison. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the community remained divided. Some felt justice had been served. Others believed an innocent man had been convicted based on interpretations rather than certainty. The case continued to be debated among experts, journalists, and the public for years, but the story didn't end there. Behind the scenes, defense attorneys were already preparing an appeal. They believed significant errors had occurred during the trial, and that new information could change everything. They argued that the original conviction was influenced by external factors, including the improper behavior of a juror, errors that violated Robert's right to a fair trial. Over time, those claims gained traction. In 2018, after extensive reviews, the conviction was overturned due to that juror misconduct. A new trial was ordered. For a brief moment, Robert walked free again, awaiting the next chapter in a case that refused to settle. What happened next would shape the entire narrative all over again. When the conviction was overturned in 2018, many believed the case of Robert and Leslie Neulander had finally reached its breaking point. After years of debate, emotional testimony, and an entire community divided, the legal system hit the reset button. The decision had nothing to do with forensic evidence or new scientific analysis. It came down to a single juror. One person who violated courtroom rules so blatantly that the entire verdict had to be thrown out. In the original trial, this juror had sent and received thousands of text messages during the proceedings. Messages that discussed testimony, witnesses, and even opinions about Robert's guilt. More than once, she ignored the judge's instructions not to discuss the case with anyone. The most shocking discovery was a message from her father, sent while the trial was still underway: "Make sure he's guilty." For the appeals court, this was more than misconduct, it was a direct attack on the integrity of the verdict. And so Robert, now in his late 60s, walked out of prison after serving nearly 3 years, released on bond and awaiting a second trial. The news stunned people across Syracuse and beyond. Supporters of the prosecution felt the system had failed Leslie again. Supporters of Robert saw his release as validation that the first trial had been flawed from the beginning. For the Neulander family, it was a moment of relief mixed with dread. They weren't done. Not yet. As Robert returned home, he resumed life under the shadow of the charges that never went away. He was still accused of killing his wife, still facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. With the retrial approaching, both sides prepared for another legal battle, this time even more intense, more detailed, and more dependent on physical evidence than the first. The prosecution believed they had something the defense couldn't get around: blood. Blood on the walls, blood on the bed frame, blood on the window, and blood that simply didn't align with the story of a fall. But they wanted more. After nearly a decade, investigators revisited every photograph, every sample, every item recovered from the home, and that's when they found it. The headboard of the bed, once considered fully processed, still had trace evidence embedded deep within the wood. Lab tests confirmed the presence of a microscopic fragment of fatty scalp tissue. The kind of tissue that transfers only during a forceful blow to the head. According to experts, there was simply no plausible way for that fragment to land on the headboard if Leslie's injuries had come solely from a fall inside the bathroom shower. This discovery became the cornerstone of the new prosecution strategy. They argued it directly contradicted Robert's version of events. If Leslie slipped in the shower, her head would have hit tile, or porcelain, or the stone ledge near the entrance, not a wooden headboard located several feet away in the bedroom. But the surprises didn't stop there. Prosecutors also revisited the photos of the nightstand, specifically the coffee mug Robert said he brought to Leslie the morning she died. He claimed he made coffee for both of them shortly before discovering her in the shower. But in the photographs, the mug sat perfectly clean. No blood. No droplets. No tiny specks of spatter. Yet the water bottles next to it were marked with blood. Experts testified that based on the angle and distribution of the blood patterns, that coffee mug should have been struck by at least some droplets. But it wasn't. And the conclusion was simple: the mug wasn't on the nightstand at the time the blood was created. According to prosecutors, this proved the timeline Robert provided was false, that he staged the scene after Leslie was already dead. The defense called these claims speculative, arguing that several factors could account for the clean mug, including shadows, camera angles, or the possibility that the mug had been placed on the nightstand at a slightly different time than the prosecution assumed. Still, the state's case grew stronger with every expert who took the stand. In the retrial, prosecutors also leaned into something they struggled to emphasize years earlier: motive. By 2012, Robert's financial life had collapsed. His clinic had shut down after insurance companies claimed he had overbilled them by more than $1 million. His hospital job was gone. And divorce, according to New York law, would have split the family home, retirement savings, and other assets right down the middle. In their view, money mattered. Image mattered. Control mattered, and then there was the personal side of the marriage. Friends testified that Leslie had confided in them about the arguments, the emotional distance, and the growing sense that she needed to leave. She had even found a rental home and planned to sign the lease the very day she died. Prosecutors suggested that Robert, facing financial catastrophe and the end of his marriage, chose murder over starting over. The defense pushed back, saying financial stress doesn't turn someone into a killer. They highlighted the couple's long history together, the deep ties to their community, and Robert's reputation as a respected physician and father. They argued that Leslie's vertigo, documented in medical reports, was enough to cause a fall. They brought their own experts to challenge the new forensic findings, claiming the science was not as clear-cut as the prosecution suggested. But this trial had something the first trial didn't: time. Time for investigators to refine their evidence. Time for experts to reanalyze every detail. Time for the jury to examine years of accumulated information. The courtroom was filled every day: journalists, doctors, neighbors, former patients, and even true crime enthusiasts who had followed the case for a decade. The emotional weight was heavier than before. Leslie's absence was felt in every testimony. And Robert sat quietly at the defense table, older now, frilier, but still maintaining the same position he had held since day one. He did not kill his wife. Closing argument stretched across hours. The prosecution called the case a mosaic, a pattern of inconsistencies, movements, stains, and actions that together formed one chilling image: homicide. The defense said the state was guessing, building theories from fragments, and ignoring the simplest explanation: a tragic accident. When the jury left to deliberate, the entire courtroom exhaled. They waited. And waited. After less time than in the first trial, the jury returned guilty. For the second time, a New York jury concluded that Robert Neulander murdered his wife. The judge sentenced him once again to 20 years to life. As he was led away, his children cried, still convinced of his innocence. Leslie's family remained divided, some believing justice had been served, others insisting that something about this case never felt right. In 2024, Robert's final appeal was denied. Barring extraordinary legal intervention, he will spend the remainder of his life in prison, and yet, even now, more than a decade after Leslie's death, people still debate the truth. Was it murder? Was it a catastrophic fall? Or was it something in between? In the end, this case became more than a criminal trial. It became a question of perception, memory, science, and the limits of certainty. One final mystery lingers: the anonymous letter sent days after Leslie died. A letter that pointed investigators toward suspicion long before the medical findings did. No one ever discovered who sent it, or what they truly knew. Let me know your thoughts about this case in the comments below, and remember to hit the like button if video kept you engaged. Thanks for watching.